What is a square root function? So before anything else, we have the learning objectives. First, define the square root function. Number two, find the domain and range of the square root function. And number three, show the graph of a square root function. And then we have the properties of the square root function. So, muna siya nga atong baga atong hinumduman to solve or to engage with the square root function. First, the domain of the square root function f of x is equal to the square root of x is given in an interval form by 0 and positive infinity. Meaning, ang atong domain sa square root function, dili siya mo go down or less than 0 or negative 1 and to negative infinity. Because kung atong kwaon ang square root sa negative number, the result will be undefined or imaginary. Then number 2, the range of the square root function f of x is equal to the square root of x is given in interval form by 0 and positive infinity. Meaning, ang value of y, value sa atong y, kasagaran magsugod gyapon or in the interval form by 0 going to the right since the square root function is an increasing function, meaning ang domain o ang range sa atong function dili gid siya mo go less than 0. So di gid siya mo negative. Then 3, the x and y intercepts are both at 0, 0 or mo ni gitawag nato vertex sa atong graph diya magsugod ang atong graph. So later on makita nato ang vertex or the starting point of our graph. Then number 4, the square root function is an increasing function. So what I have said earlier, that the graph of the square root function is always increasing or going right or forward. So what is a square root function? So unsa day na siya? So the square root function is a one-to-one function that takes a non-negative number as input and returns the square root of that number as output. Meaning, if naatay domain or values of x, pag abot sa range or the x values, dapat isara ang iyang value of y. Dili pwede nga ang x ang x values or our domains pag abot sa y or the range adunay two or more values of y. Dili na siya pareha sa ato tao nga. Example, if nanguyab ka, ikaw raman isa nanguyab, pag abot dayon sa y, daganon nimo. Kumbaga ingon ana. So in the square root function, dapat ikaw raman isa or example 1. So pag abot dito sa y value or the range, if 2 ang iyang nakuha si number 2, si number 2 ra gyud wala na ilain. Right? So muna siya ang the square root function. So what is the domain and range of a function? So the domain is the set of all points over which a function is defined. So any values of x in the square root function can be our domain in the square root function. So whatever numbers we are going to put in the x values, except the negative numbers, can be our domains in the square root function. Then the range is the set of values the function takes on as output. So meaning, gadepende ang atong range or the y values kung unsa ang atong gina-input as domain. So just take a look this illustration. So we have two ovals from left and also there from the right. So in the left ovals, we have -1, +1, 7.5. These are the x values. And in the right oval, +1, 49.25. These are now the these are now the y values or the range. So for example, we have the x value which is the -1. Then pag abot sa range which is the y value, it has only one value in y which is +1. Then if we have +1 in the x value, then pag abot sa y, still +1. And if we have +7, the y value is 49. And if we have 0.5 as x value, then at the range of the y value, we have 0.25. So notice that kung tanaw na to ang x values, naging sa specific na value of y. So dili siya pwede nga ang x maduwa ang iyang range or y values. So kung atong obserbahan, kabaligtaran ang nahitabo sa range or y value. Just take a look that +1 in the y value. So in the y value, we have +1. Then from the x values, so naa siya duha ka x values which is -1 and +1. But still, this illustration or this situation is still a function. So notice that si x ra ang dili pwede magduwa ang iyang value pag abot sa y. Right? Wala, naghang na sad. So finding the domain and range. So unsaon na to magkuha si domain ug range. So examples, if we have f of x is equal to the square root of x, so obviously we have the domain x is equal to or greater than 0, or from its interval notation, we have 0 and positive infinity. Nga naman, based on the definition or the properties of the square root function, note that we cannot take the square root of a negative number. Why? It is because if we are going to find the square root of any negative number, the result will be imaginary. So dili nato siya makuha ang iyang solution. So if we are going to plug or put 0 in the equation f of x is equal to the square root of x, so the x to be replaced by 0. So the square root of 0 is 0. So it means our domain is starting from 0 going to the right as increasing, or x is equal to or greater than 0, or as its interval notation, we have 0 and positive infinity, meaning any number from 0 going to the right can be our domain of the equation f of x is equal to the square root of x. So how we are going to find now our y values or our range? So simply plug the domain from the equation f of x is equal to the square root of x. For example, if we are going to plug 0 in the equation f of x is equal to the square root of x, so we have now the square root of 0 is 0. Meaning to say, our range now is still from 0 going to the right or positive infinity. So now this is y is equal to or greater than 0, or from its interval notation, we have 0 and positive infinity. Take note, we cannot take the square root of a negative number. So it means in the square root function, we should always put in mind that the square root function is an increasing function, meaning it never go down or less than 0 or from negative 1 down to the negative infinity. So if we are going to have the values of x and the value of y, so that after that we can easily locate those points as the starting of our graphing. So so if our x is 0, so plug that 0 in the equation f of x is equal to the square root of x. The result is 0. Since the square root of 0 is 0, and then if we have x as 1, then the y value is 1. And if we have 4, the value of y is now 2. And if our x is 9, then our y is 3. So this is now our points. So if we are going to locate those points in the graph or in the Cartesian plane, so notice that in this graph, the vertical line is our y-axis and the horizontal line is our x-axis. So if our first order pair is 0 and 0, meaning that is the beginning of our graph. So this is now the vertex or the center of our graph. And if our second order pair is 1 and 1, meaning from our vertex or the beginning of our graph, we count one count going to the right and one count going up or upward for our second order pair. If we have 4 and 2 as our third order pair, so we have from the R vertex, we count 4 as our value of x going to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 2 counts from that particular 4 going upward as our third order pair. And if we have 9 as x, and we have the y value, which is 3, and from our vertex, which is 0, 0, we count 9 counts going to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And from that 9, we count 3 counts going upward. So that is now the the face of our graph of the equation f of x is equal to the square root of x. So what have you observed? The face of our graph. So the our graph is always facing or facing right, because based on the property of the square root function, this function is an increasing function, meaning its movement is always going to the right or infinite, positive infinity. So how about this number 2? So j of x is equal to the square root of x plus 3. So in this case, we have a solution. So in this case, I use the inequality to easily get the domain. So simply, I I got the x plus 3, then I equate it to inequality. Then x plus 3 is equal to or greater than 0. So since we're going to subtract subtract 3 from both sides, so the result will be x plus 3 minus 3 is equal to or greater than 0 minus 3. So the result is x is equal to or greater than -3. So meaning our domain of this equation g of x is equal to the square root of x plus 3 is from -3 going to the positive infinity or going to the right. So just so we will try to put -3 to the equation g of x is equal to x plus 3. So if we are going to put that in the radical sign under the radical sign x plus 3, so -3 plus 3, the result is 0. Then extract the square root of 0, so that is 0. So meaning our range is now y is equal to or greater than 0. And for its interval notation form, we have 0 and positive infinity. Meaning, so if we will try to use numbers from our domain greater than or equal to -3, so we can get the range of our equation or function, which is g of x, is equal to x plus 3. So notice that in this equation or in this function, I use the I use the numbers which can be easily extracted in terms of its square root. So it's better in the square root function. We use the we will use the perfect numbers. So those numbers which can be easily extracted in terms of its square root, just like 0, 1, 4, 9, 16, 36, and so on. So this is now the table of values of x and y. So if our x is -3, our y is 0. If our x is 1, then our y is 2. If our x is 6, so our y is 3. And if our x is 13, then our y is 4. So this is now the points of on the graph. So if we have this, so we can easily locate these points on the graph. So let's try to find its domain and range by just looking the given examples. So number one, f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 2. So unsa ka ang yang domain or range? So simply by looking or thinking about the property of the square root function, which is we cannot take the square root of negative number, we should always put in mind that any number we can plug in the equation f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 2 is we are thinking that the possible domain on the domain of this function is positive. So let's find out. So in the number one, the domain of that function f of x is equal to x minus the square root of x minus 2 is from 0 and positive infinity. Meaning, if we are going to plug 0 in this equation, f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 2. So, the result is 0. Then how about if we are going to plug positive 1? So, the square root of positive 1 minus 2 is now -1, right? So, meaning we cannot use that as our domain since the result is negative. So notice that the domain of the function is always increasing going to the right. Then if our y is if our domain is 0, to get the y or the range. So we simply plug 0 in the equation f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 2. So we replace x by 0. So the square root of 0 is 0. And 0 minus 2, the result is negative 2. That is why our range or the value of y is from negative 2 and going to the right or positive infinity. Then how about the number 2 example? So f of x is equal to the square root of x plus 5. So unsa iyang domain of range? Simply, if we have, kung atong kuha niyang inequality, so ang mahitabo, the result will be x is equal to or greater than my negative 5. Or in the interval notation, we have negative 5 and positive infinity. So we will try to plug negative 5 in the equation, which is f of x is equal to the square root of x plus 5. So if our x is minus 5, which is the domain, so the equation will be f of x is equal to the square root of minus 5 plus 5, which is the square root of 0. So the result is 0. That is why our range or our y will be greater than or equal to 0. And for its interval notation from 0 going to the right or positive infinity. Right. So how to graph the square root function? So unsaon nato mag-graph? So complete the table using the function rule. So muna siya atong gamiton. So if we know how to plug numbers from our equation f of x is equal to y, meaning if i-plug nato ang values of x or our domain for the f of x is equal to y, we can now have the different points on the graph. For example, if our x is 0, so we extracted the square root of 0 and subtract the result of it of 2, negative 2. So the square root of 0 minus 2, the result is negative 2. And if our y, rather, if our x is 1, so we extracted the square root of 1 from the equation f of x is equal to f of x, the square root of x minus 2. So the result is square root of 1 is 1, subtracted 2 by 2. So that is 1. Now we have the second point, which is 1 and negative 1. And if our x is 4, we extracted its square root, which is 2, then subtract it by 2. So the result is 0. And we have now the third point, which is 4 and 0. And then if our x is 9, we simply extracted its square root, which is 3, and subtracted it by 2. The result is 1. And therefore, we have now the fourth point, which is 9, which is 9 and positive 1. So to locate those points in the graph, simply, since our first point is 0 and negative 2, so that is now our vertex or the beginning of our graph. So simply 0, so our x is 0, then our y is negative 2, meaning we from the 0 of the value of x, we count 2 counts from the 0 going down or downward, since the sign is negative. So that is now the starting point of our graph. Then if our second point is positive 1 and negative 1, simply we count one count from the 0 going to the right, which is 1 as our x value. Then going below, which is negative 1. That is our second point. Then the third point, we have x is 4, so we count 4 from the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and since the y is 0, so still the point of the third point is in the 4 line. Then the last, we have 9 and positive 1, so we have from the 0, we count 9 counts. Then going upward, 1 count since the value of y is positive. So if we are done with locating those points, so simply we can easily connect those points from the vertex. So mo na dahil siya ang result sa atong graph. So notice that the face of our graph is always facing right or increasing function. So that will be all, and